I like to start with an explosion of blood, explosion of tech, explosion of whatever.
The only thing I have ever learned time and again about how to get readers to willingly dive into your story and accept what you're selling them is to be consistent, to set up your rules and play fairly. Don't pull some fast one with a superpower or anything like that. And I've always abided by that, and it always works for me. I don't think that's sufficient to describe what you do in your horror or whatever else. This is my favorite. It came from Del Rio. If I tried to pitch this book, it would sound like a bad trauma film. And yet there's nothing kitschy, there's no authorial, I guess wink is the only way to put it. You're not joking when you write this book. It's very powerful and very serious and shows a beautifully portrayed estranged long distance relationship between a father and daughter. So you can see where I'm a little puzzled because I totally bought into the entire premise of this book, the multiple weird things he threw at the reader. So how do you get readers to suspend disbelief with a guy walking around with a giant rabbit head on him, radioactive, herding chupacabras? That's not an exaggeration, folks. Am I remembering the plot correctly, Stephen?
Yeah, yeah, that's it. That's it. Yeah. You're right that not breaking your own rules or the rules you've kind of laid out in the novel or the system you've generated, not poking a hole in that balloon is the first step, of course. You can also poke a hole in reality. Like I remember I was reading a novel once about somebody driving tractor, and I came up driving tractor, so I'm quite familiar with that. The writer had the character in a tractor going down one row, and they get to the end of the row and they haul the wheel over and come back the other way. And that just totally blew my belief. Like, I guess my belief had been suspended, then it hit the ground. Because in a tractor, you don't turn with the front wheels. You'll break your axles if you do that. You turn with the brakes. You know, you hit the left brake and you pivot. That's not something that, like, the story, that's like the world, you know? You've got to get those kind of
Right.
details right. I think the big key to getting the reader to jump with you into these strange cartoonish places is getting them emotionally invested in the character such that they no longer have their defenses up. You don't want to poke holes in the world like that tractor turn, of course. You want to get that kind of stuff right. If you have a magic system in place, you don't want to have somebody who is outside that magic system messing everything up, proving that this isn't a system at all. I really think the most important thing is getting inside the headspace or heart space of the characters. Once you've done that, you can really take them anywhere. A third thing might be how you generate authority in a novel is generally through little details that make the world seem real. Like I'm teaching a Western course now, so I'm reading a lot of Old West novels, and I'm finding that a lot of these Western writers, they spend the first third kind of establishing that they know how a trail drive works, they know how this gun works, they know what a saloon was like in 1883 or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. Stuff that I wouldn't have guessed, and what that does, that's like building up credit for them. They get more and more authority, and I'm like, I believe you, I believe you, you're real, you're speaking from a real space. So that then when they take me across some big logical leap into crazy land of the baron and all his gunfighters want to kill me now or whatever it is, I go with them because they're spending the authority that they've earned with all those details, if that makes sense.
What you're describing is interesting. It's a combination of emotional investment and factual accuracy. Like you said, punching a hole in reality is almost as bad as violating your own fiction code, right? I think Mongrels is the best example of that. It's a werewolf story, but I've always thought it was more of a family story. You're talking about a young man being raised by his aunt and uncle.
Yeah.
Could you have carried that story, do you think, then, without the werewolf element to it?
Yeah, I think it would take longer to tell that story without werewolves. I think it would probably like be half again longer. I think really not just werewolves. I mean, I think fantastic elements in fiction tend to economize and let it be told faster in a more compressed way. I feel like I definitely could have told that without werewolves. You know, it felt to me like I kind of was. I guess what I'm saying is I emotionally invested enough in the reality of these werewolves that it was reality to me. In order for me to believe in these werewolves as real, I had to make them make sense, you know, and to make them make sense, they had to like adhere to conservation of mass. I couldn't have a 150-pound woman turning into a 380-pound werewolf because where does that extra
Right.
mass come from? And also, when she transforms back, is there just a big blob of fat beside her? Like, where does the extra go? You know, like that doesn't make
Right.
sense. I guess magic can explain it, but when you have to fall back on magic to explain stuff, I think you're already failing. I mean, if magic's built into your world, that's great. But I think if it's an excuse or an explanation, then you're probably failing. There's all kinds of stuff like that with these werewolves. They have to make biological sense. And also, if they're itinerant, if they're just going from town to town because people figure out who they are, they're going to have a hard time passing a credit check down at the car lot, you know? And so they have those kind of daily problems of just how to navigate the world, you know, how to have enough money to get a Slurpee, that kind of stuff. That's how they became real to me. And hopefully that's what made them feel real to the readers who, you know, believed in them.
I'm curious then, I've found time and again, when I think I've researched everything to the nth degree, I discover I've made some tactical error, like say in a culinary scene. Like you just said, you know, establishing credibility, you know, I'll have somebody who cooks or knows wine tell me I'm way off base. Does that ever happen to you?
Oh, that's definitely happened. I had a story that has a character at some point crocheting, or maybe some crochet needles are beside the couch or something. Anyway, I talked about having two needles to crochet, and somebody jumped on me like when they read the story because they said, "No, you only have like evidently one with crochet." I still don't understand. I just know now not to talk about crochet because I can't research it well enough to talk about it. I've also done that same mistake out loud with people with conductors because I always thought they had two batons. That they're like you, but evidently they just have one. So I don't know. If I were a conductor, I'd have two, so I could point at everybody.
So any profession with a stick, you need to be very careful about, it sounds like, right?
Very, very careful. But you know, by the same token, I have a story, The Night Cyclist. It's up on tour.com talking about culinary stuff, Greg. I submitted it to a grad workshop that I was with at the time. My character was a chef who was always pedaling home on a bike trail at 1 or 2 in the morning. And a couple of the people in class had kitchen experience, and they explained to me that chefs carry their own knives in a roll and all the stuff about a kitchen, which I have no idea. I don't even like food that much. I just like ketchup. Like food's just an excuse to eat ketchup for me, you know? So I don't know that kind of stuff. But they told me about this. And so I looked up some pictures of it and I put it in the story. And then I had so many readers respond to that.
Right.
They're like, how did you get all these kitchen details? You must have worked in a kitchen. And that made it real for them. That to me was really the secret to the story, the secret to making the story real. It wasn't actually vampires or bicycling stuff. It was those kitchen details, which earned me authority, which I could then spend on vampires that ride bicycles, which is a ridiculous conceit.
You did know your kitchen stuff because I've bartended for years and I've known plenty of people in the food service industry. And I thought, well, there's more things Steven's done. And bicycling, clearly, you know.
Oh, by the same token, like in this book, Only Good Indians, like I know hunting in that way. Like I've been hunting my whole life. And so the hunting details were super easy for me to get right. The post office details in here, I had to like search all this stuff because I don't know jack about the post office. I know something comes to my mailbox and sometimes it doesn't. You know, that's all I really know. I had to figure out a little bit about sorting machines and like how long you're at a place before you get your own route and that kind of stuff, you know, just because I wanted to feel like real to people. I wanted them to believe in this world. And also, somebody was saying somewhere that I must know Harleys. I've never had a motorcycle. I just have to fake it. But I've always hung out with people who are into bikes. I mean, I've ridden a lot, but I never have had my own. I never had taken my own apart. I've taken a lot of vehicles apart, but never a motorcycle. So I had to kind of fake that a little bit and not go too deep into it because that'll like expose my ignorance on the whole
The
thing.
one secret I've found to doing research for a field you're not familiar with, industry catalogs like supply catalogs are really eye opening. I've learned as much about law enforcement looking at their catalogs, what they buy and sell, as I have from reading newspapers or accounts of cops. So if you want to write a book about a zookeeper, I guarantee you somewhere out there is a website that sells supplies to zoos, and you will find all sorts of minutiae that you hadn't really thought about prior to that. That's the only power tip I have to offer.
That's wonderful because what those little like weird details get you is you can vault over all the dark spaces you don't know and you can land at this little random detail that makes it feel like you know everything between this and that, you know?
So you've got point A, which is the characters, their emotional depth and how real they are, and then the real factual world that they inhabit. And it seems to me like once you get those two poles down, the magic in between people will just swallow whole. And that sounds a little too crass, but am I interpreting what you're saying right?
Yeah, I think so. And it's really about making them want to believe, you know, like turning them all into Fox Mulder. They want to believe that, and they're not going to be poking holes in things the whole time. That's the trick. And if the story is moving fast enough, And if it's compelling enough, engaging enough, then you've got it, And usually you do that with characters who we care about. Anyways, we don't have to like them, but we have to invest in them emotionally and intellectually.
The other thing I noticed that you do, you mentioned before, you're like adhering to laws of physics. It seems to me there's, at least from recent memory right here, there's always a kind of trade off. Now, talking strictly about the fantastic elements in your books, there's always a trade off. Again, in Mongrels, you go into probably the most detail I've ever heard about life as a werewolf, not wearing stretch pants, keep the garbage sealed up, all those details. But there's a trade off. Again, they can't wear stretch pants because when you change back, it gets pulled into your skin. It came from Del Rio. There was the whole thing with his chronic sores and the with a zinc or
Yeah,
something that
those
he was
zinc
using.
nitrate sticks that you like
Right.
burn. Yeah.
So whenever you do create something fantastic or otherworldly, it seems like it also has its own set of equal and opposite reactions. Things there's always a trade-off. Nothing is for free. Am I making sense?
That totally makes sense. And really, that's precisely what I love about reading Octavia Butler. Because when you read her, you find that all those little details are both earned, like they earn their place in the text, but they also are used later. She has a really dense way of writing that comes off so easy. But all of her little details like that, it's like they're successive ripples out from one fantastic thing. I really think if as a writer, if I'm going to pretend like there's teleportation in the world, talking about how teleportation works is going to be extremely boring because who in the world is going to talk about that because it's in the world already. But what's going to make this world real to the reader are the farthest ripples. Like, our bathroom's a thing anymore? Do people just press a button and evacuate their bowels with teleportation? I mean, that kind of stuff. That's the
Right.
kind of stuff that is like those ripples, and those ripples are what makes a world real.
I go back to Mongrels pointing this stuff out, the detail you went into that was very much animal biology.
I can add something that in Mongrels it is about the like they have to make biological physical sense, but also what I was really even more interested in than that was the culture that develops as a result of these biological imperatives they have to follow, and the culture of being a werewolf is what was really fascinating to me. Because I mean, if they have a culture, then that means that they're not monsters; they're people.
So you talked about the farthest ripples. When you're looking at those aftershocks, those far-reaching side effects of whatever rules for the fantastic you set up, how do you arrive at those furthest repercussions?
I should say also that I'm not the one who came up with this idea about ripples. There's some one of the like hoary, like HOARY, not the other kind of hoary, I guess, which I don't know
Yeah.
if it is a word. I'm old science fiction writers talks about like third level or fifth level. They call them some level away from the weird thing details, and that's what fleshes the world out, right? So my ripples are just their third or fifth level, whatever they say. I can't remember who it is. It's probably Clark, I would guess. He kind of tended to think like that. I'm not one of those writers who knows the world before I start writing about it. It's great if you do this. It doesn't matter how you do it as long as we all get to the same place or to some good place, anyways. But the way I do it, I just hear a line and then I type that line and it becomes another line. That becomes a paragraph, becomes a scene, a section, a chapter, a part, a novel. But I never do know like the climate, the socio-political issues or whatever of the world I'm in until I start writing, which is to say, I'm on a big landscape, and every step I take, it's like in Princess Mononoke. Every step that big god takes makes the life come around it. That's how it feels to me when I'm writing. Every story step I take into a different place, then it's like there's light on that now, and I can see around there. Through taking a lot of dead ends, a lot of stupid paths, I finally get this whole landscape of the story charted out, which someone who world builds, they have it all charted out beforehand. So we get to the same place just in different ways. But the way that I stumble upon those details are generally in the dead ends. I'll be chasing something down, like what if a character left this party and went to the store, and while I'm chasing that down, they pull out their wallet to pay for something, and I see a detail that is a far ripple of something else. And then I trap that detail, and I usually end up snipping that dead end off because it doesn't contribute to the plot. But I keep that detail, and then
Okay.
that detail comes back into the story without. It doesn't have to be like a route to the detail. The detail just exists, and it suggests that dead end route that we're not on anymore, and that makes the reader kind of be aware of all these further spaces of the novel that they don't actually have access to.
Sarah Gren and I touched on this last month. These dead ends are really not dead ends. Anything that gets you to the end is not a wasted shovel of dirt if you're trying to burrow down to something. When you do research, do you have a go-to approaches in libraries, yay libraries, academic papers, contacts in the field, etc.? I mean, I've already thrown out my secret weapon, which is industry catalogs. What about you?
I've done a version of that industry catalog thing for All the Beautiful Sinners because I had characters in there speaking by ham radio. And so I found some catalogs from the year the story had taken place in the novel, and I ordered those from eBay, which costed like $30 for a little bitty pamphlet, you know. And it was really neat going through those delicate pages and finding that stuff that you're talking about, Craig. But in grad school, I had a professor, Janet Broway. She was dissertation director. She told all of us, yes, do research for your piece, whatever your project is. Do all the research you can. Go to every great library in the world and dig and dig and dig into this. She said the trick is don't write any of it down. Don't keep a growing stack of index cards with all this neat stuff you're finding, because then when you sit down to write, you're going to feel like you're having to check off this card and that card and that card. And it's not a story anymore. It's just like showing off your research. And showing off your research doesn't impress anybody, except it makes it feel like that research is worthwhile, but it's not really worthwhile if you're not telling a gripping story. My own process for research is I only do it when I absolutely, absolutely have to. And I generally foist it off on other people because I just don't like to do it. I just would rather be writing. My thing is if I can come up with a detail that's convincing, I'd rather be convincing than actually write. So I'd rather make it up. But I do have to find stuff out. Like in The Only Good Indians say, there's a moment where someone sees at nighttime some elk. And I had for draft after draft, I had green eye shine, like the eyes reflecting in the light. But when we got right down to the wire of publishing it, I was going through it the last time and I got paranoid. I'm like, oh no, am I just remembering that? Is it deer that have green eyes? What color reflective eyes do elk have? So I did a few quick searches. I could find nothing. So I texted a lot of friends I know who are outdoors a lot about that just for what they've seen. A couple of them got back to me. They said green, green, and then somebody said red, and that just ruined my world because I didn't know if he was right or who was right, you know. And then one of my brother-in-law, somehow he's like he has a much better search foo than I do. I'm a terrible searcher. He found a chart which lists all of the animals' different colored eye shines and sent that to me, and that was a lifesaver. That's generally my first resort is I text people who I know are kind of in this place or tangential to this place that I'm writing about. And I ask them because I think their feet on the ground experience is probably going to be better than what I'm going to search up in a Reddit thread.
I've seen the elk eye shine. I vaguely remember it being a yellowish green sort of thing. Scared me to death late at night in the mountains of New Mexico. I was driving, I was sleep deprived, and I came around the corner and this thing just lit up. I'm convinced that's where the alien head shape comes from.
Yeah, it might be.
Because it was right outside Roswell.
I grew up talking Einstein. I grew up with a story about the Marfa monster down in kind of Southwest Texas. No, this was actually the Menard monster. There's a lot of monsters in Texas. This was the Menard monster, which is kind of in that same general area. But the Menard monster was evidently like my dad's friend supposedly experienced this, and they were driving along somewhere and they saw that eye shine like you're talking about out in the pasture, and they stopped and they tried to get whatever it was in their headlights, and it took off running. They were right behind it chasing it. They were starting to pull alongside, and then it looked back at them and they just hit the brakes because a horse or a deer, nothing will look back when it's running. So anything that will look back and shoot those eyes at you, that's something wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Sound advice, everyone. Danielle made a comment. Heard Philip K. Dick had said, "Know what your characters do for a living."
Dude, yeah, I mean that's wonderful advice. Also, know what your character's 12th birthday party was like. Know what they used to watch at 2 in the morning when they were 16 years old. All that stuff. But the trick is, it's enough that you know it. You don't have to put it on the page. It's like that dark unknown space that beyond what you're delivering to the reader that makes the character or the scene or whatever it is feel real.
Nathan, you had a question.
I'm interested in how to create like an effect. You have that weird detail, the weird thing, the details and ripples that give a kind of authority. If you want to create like a really uncanny kind of effect, is there kind of like a misalignment of some of the details sometimes, or how to go about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think to create that uncanny feel, what I would do is I would lock it in the character's mind more than in the world, if that makes sense. I would have the character see, if they would see a rock, but then there would be a shimmer of a moment where did that rock have legs like a tick, That to me is always the most uncanny, because when a character loses the ability to trust their perceptions, then anything is possible. That gets really scary. But with any effect, whether uncanny or gory or surprise, whatever, it's usually about lulling the reader into a sense of comfort and then blindsiding them with something. And when you blindside them, make it a barrage of sensory details in their head. If they're looking away or looking through their fingers, you can still get in through their nose, their mouth, their ears, their skin, or whatever. I would first lock it in the character's perception, and second, I would lure them into trusting that nothing's going to happen here, and then something's going to happen here. And you can lull them by doing it the way like, I don't know, when Ripley is not Ripley, who's the other guy? Harry Dean Stanton's character in an Alien, isn't he? Whatever. When he's
very
creeping
first one.
around when he's creeping around the bowels of the Nostromo.
It was Dallas, wasn't that his name? Dallas, the head guy.
He had the beard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah.
But when he's creeping around looking for something he doesn't even know the shape of or the size of, and the cat jumps out, and it startles us. It's a jump scare, but that's also setting us up for, oh, these scary things are fake. And then steam comes out at him from a tunnel, or not a tunnel, from a pipe, and he jumps back, and we the reader get lulled into thinking, oh, these are all fake surprises, such that when we see the real alien, it totally blindsides us.
A good question from Matt. Do you ever find yourself working on a project and you hit a complete dead end with regard to its internal logic? If so, what do you do with that, and what's your approach to dealing with that issue?
Yeah, I do. Like, Mongrels is a good example of that. I had Mongrels rigged where werewolves are always born in pairs, and they're born in pairs because there can be a wolf and a human, and the human can be first food for the wolf. It's like a survival mechanism. It's nature is pretty violent and all.
You're a sick man, Stephen.
Yeah, but then my editor, she said, "Well, I don't understand. How can Libby and Darren be twins and both werewolves, and then there's a third sister floating around?" And I was like, "I don't have no idea. I didn't think of any of that." And so that was like a big logical, physical wall. And so my grand solution was they're triplets. Triplets are really rare, but they happen. And that's just a workaround that I had to come up, because it was way too complicated to think all werewolf litters are triplets, because then it broke my first meal thing. Because I could have had two first meals, but I don't know, that wouldn't really quite work. So yeah, I hit walls like that all the time. Also, as a lot of y'all know, of course, you always hit like story walls. It's not necessarily the physical world you're trying to maintain. It's a problem with plot or something. And if I have a problem with page 114 that I cannot get around, the solution is never on page 114. The solution is nearly always back on page 35. The problem is always earlier. And so what I do when I hit that wall is I go back to the beginning, and I just peel layer after layer, and I read really slowly and carefully, and I see the branch point that led me to page 35, and I try to repair it, and then I have to do a lot of rewriting on those intervening pages, but that's what it is.
Yeah, that's the Billy Wilder quote that I think I've mentioned in every one of these sessions so far, that if you have a problem in your third act, it's a problem with your first act. Somebody asked about easing into the fantastic elements. I've noticed that in ghost stories, the tale is being told secondhand seems like a good trick to keep the tale possible and the narrator relatable, but also seems risky because it obviously lowers the stakes. Any advice on using secondhand reporting as a technique to ease the audience into accepting something fantastical?
Yeah, it's like the old Victorian model. That's how most of Joseph Conrad's novels are.
That's Dracula, right? All of Dracula.
Yeah, they're all secondhand, and it's a way to like remove the narrator from the guilt of this obvious sounding lie or something. But then, of course, the real rhetoric going on is, this is true, this is true, this is true. And I think easing into it in that fashion is great. And it only tends to work, though, when at the end of the relaying of this story, you go one step further, and suddenly the story is coming for the narrator in some fashion. Like Interview with the Vampire, Anne Rice. It's all it's Louis telling this reporter all about his travails as a vampire, and then at the end, there's Lestat in the back of Louis's car. The story comes for the person in it, like that, the person telling it. And So that I think you have to do that. I don't think you used to have to do that. And Joseph Conrad stuff never really come out of the tale. It's just I heard this once on the high seas, and then we get all the Lord Jim stuff or whatever it is, and we never really get out of that. But nowadays we expect the frame to close. We feel let down if the frame doesn't. It's for the fantastic and when to introduce it. I'm a really big proponent of whether you're in horror, science fiction, or fantasy, or whatever non realistic genre you're doing, you need to establish very early on that there's bioluminescent telepathic kangaroos in this world. If you spring those on us in page 50 of an 80-page novella, we're going to feel betrayed. If that's in your first paragraph, then it's assumed in the world, and we're going to roll with it.
Please tell me you're actually working on something with bioluminescent kangaroos.
I need to see a kangaroo first.
Sam asked about the perception of your main character and the jump scares and such like an alien. And somebody asked, are you talking about an unreliable narrator? Now, I think I know the answer, but this is all about you. So
yeah, I mean, if we're talking about a narrator, then I think every narrator is unreliable because a narrator is not a documentary lens giving you every single moment of everything that's happening. There's always some interpretation. There's always some selection process. I'm going to give you these events, not those events, and it's always towards an argument. And the argument is usually about my own role in these events. I'm actually the hero of this story. Let me tell it to you this way. But being over like a protagonist's shoulder, locked in their perception, locked in their head, looking through their eyes or something. I think that's not necessarily an unreliable narrator. I mean, every story, I guess, at some level we can say has a narrator, but then and that the story is being told, But like in this one, in Only Good Indians, we're with Lewis, ostensibly third person, and we're locked in his weird perceptions of is this real, is this not real? And he doesn't trust himself at all to differentiate anymore, but he knows he has to eventually commit.
I think having a narrator questioning their own perceptions or not certain about something in a way makes them more credible. They're not trying to convince people that they saw something that was real, right? And same with the second person narration. It comes off almost like documentation, which is what made Dracula work. Dracula was entirely documentation, newspaper articles and correspondence and such. Heather was asking, since you don't do world building ahead of time, writing sort of by the seat of your pants, that's what you described. What do you follow to create the story as you go? Like, what is guiding that process then?
Like there's method acting. I think I do method writing. I just put myself in the moment, in the shoes of the protagonist, and like, well, I'm in a well, and then there's a monster out there. What do I do next? And that's just how I figured out. What I found that when I have the story bullet pointed beforehand, that it's just about navigating to this bullet point, then to that bullet point, and that bullet point, and then the story doesn't open organically the way I do it. It's kind of like how actors and when they're shooting something, they always ask, or the stereotype is they always ask, "What's my motivation here?" That's kind of what I ask in every little piece I'm writing. What would I do if I were this character? I mean, if I were this character, and also I was dragging this baggage of their past behind, or I had their same goals or whatever.
Would you consider talking to us about how your indigeneity has informed your approach to suspension of disbelief, or is it just generally about celebrating indigeneity in your writing?
Man, that's bold to spell indigeneity in a chat. That is a hard.
Try pronouncing it with cottonmouth.
That's a hard. I don't know if I could spell that with 3 tries. That's tricky. I like it. I like that word a lot. Don't get me wrong. People always ask me, "Are you trying to push back against like poor representation or whatever?" And I never am. And I am trying to do real people. In order to do real people, then I have to make them real to what I know, or real to who I know. And just doing that does kind of automatically push back against poorly done representations or damaging representations, but it's never I'm coming at it for that reason, if that makes sense. Yeah, Indian stuff doesn't affect any of the fantastic elements in my story, I don't think. If there is an origin point or an origin story for all the weird stuff in my stories, it's that when I was in 3rd or 4th grade, and my mom we'd go to the grocery store like every 2 weeks. We lived way out in the country. She'd park me at the magazine rack while she went shopping, and I would sit there and I would read the Inquirer cover to cover, and I didn't know that the Inquirer was like fake. If it is fake, who knows? But I didn't know that it was, and so I totally believed everything going on in the Inquirer and Weekly World
Wow.
News. It really was probably until sixth or seventh grade that I started to think, I don't know, did JFK really hang out with the aliens? But it was too late because my kid heart, which I still have inside me, believed it already, and I can't undo that.
I've always found the Weekly World News just the chains are completely off. I think my favorite headline in the Weekly World News was "I was Bigfoot's love slave," full page article.
I've got
And
that.
that's
I've got that one on my wall. Yeah.
That's not even the most outlandish. I always assumed that Mongrels there was some kind of commentary there, so it's interesting to hear you say there's no commentary, you're just being true to what you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, but at the same time, I don't know werewolves. I do know a lot of Indian people, of course, like my own family for one. But mongrels is for sure. I don't know, exploring or punching back or doing something with a lot of like Indian issues and Indian stereotypes, for sure. Like to me, especially when Libby is in the grocery store and the narrator is young, and she's calling Darren's girlfriend a blonde werewolf or something, and you see that with Indian people all the time, like talking bad about the blonde girlfriend, the blonde boyfriend, or something.
It's blonde is a pejorative almost.
Yeah, it's Custer's hair color, of course.
Okay, there's that. How do you approach figuring out how long a piece is going to be? Is that something you plan in advance to fit a story to a page limit, or is it something that arises as you write?
I guess a good example of that would be after mapping the interior. Ellen Datlow asked me to do another novella for her, and I'm like, all right, mapping the interior took 4 days. I can take 4 more days to do this. And so I sat down and I started trying to write a novella, and it turned into a novel. It was called The Babysitter Lives, a haunted house novel. And I'm like, crap, I didn't mean to write a novel. I meant to write a novella. And so I sat down again to write a novella, and I wrote another novel, Killer on the Road.
I hate it when that happens.
I know, can I not write novellas? What's going on? I did it the third time, and it became this. It became The Winged Indians, and those other two are coming out also. It was probably my fourth or fifth try when I finally did Night of the Mannequins, and I kept it to like 130 pages, and I thought, oh, I can finally rest. I can quit doing all this. I was like on a treadmill, or a hamster wheel or something. My very favorite length of all to write is flash fiction. I love flash fiction. That's closest to my heart forever and always. I love that it's so condensed that kind of legitimizes any formal risks you want to take. When you're taking formal risks in a novel or a short story, you kind of have to, at some point, justify it. In flash fiction, you don't have to justify it at all. You just jump into the deep end and hope somebody jumps with you. And I love that so much.
I've read some of your flash fiction on your website. You have a few pieces. I remember one, the story ending some guy playing a flute made out of somebody's bone.
That's right. Yeah, that's the Bone Doctor, maybe. Yeah, I forgot about that one. I had the idea for that one when, like, I have a rib that I heard it a long time ago. I didn't have health insurance, so it like healed wrong, and so this rib is always coming loose and jacking all around. And I had a doctor a few years ago. He told me, he said, we can either get a screw and screw this to your spine, or we can just pull it out. And I thought, well, those both sound kind of bad. But I also thought if I had my own rib, I could use it like a conductor. I'd have one part of a conductor unit, and I could like tell people what to do. That'd be so cool to hold your own rib and tell people what to do. And so that's where that story comes.
Do you have the rib, or is it bolted to your spine?
They didn't bolt it, and well, actually, I just decided I needed a different doctor.
Was he a doctor? Did you do a background on him and find out he was not even a doctor? He was just looking to build. He's building a person one part at a time. Is that?
Oh man, talking a lot. I had a friend one of my friends in high school. I talked to him like 20 years after high school, and he said, "Yeah, I got a vasectomy a few weeks ago," which is what you talk about when you're in your 30s and 40s, I guess. And I said, "Really? How much did that cost? Or did you go to Midland, or which is the big town?" Because he lives in a small town. And he said, "No." He said, "There's this guy who lives in a camper behind the Town and Country convenience store, and he'll do vasectomies for $50." And so my friend got a behind the convenience store vasectomy. It worked, evidently. He didn't have any more kids, but that is I don't think I have the nerve to do that. I would just save up for a real vasectomy.
I don't think saying the behind the liquor store vasectomy worked is really a credit to the vasectomy. I think anybody on this call could do a vasectomy with whatever we have, and it would work. Let's see. Hopefully not a spoiler, but the Only Good Indians didn't really feel like traditional third person because of those tales at the end of certain chapters that led back to the elk-head woman talking. Was that a narrative device you were always using, or was it something that came to you as you were writing and rewriting? You mentioned in other interviews about being inspired by the changing voice in Radio Free Albemuth. Was that something that
Yeah,
inspired that?
Radio Free Albemuth is forever one of my main like inspirations or like things I want to rise to and meet in some fashion or answer anyways. Yeah, when I first wrote the Only Good Indians, the first section, the house that ran red, was initially in what felt like second person, only in the very last line of it that it got revealed that was actually a dramatic monologue, which is like Robert Browning used to do in his poetry to this lover, that person, whatever. Like you're talking to someone with the text. And then the rest of the novel was interspersed with that dramatic monologue, which had already revealed what it was. But then the editor told me, he said, that's a neat trick and all, but I don't like it. He said, why don't you make it third person? Which I did. I made the first part third person, which requires rewriting it from the ground up because you take different angles with. But nevertheless, a little bit of that dramatic monologue layering or something was left for the second and the third part. My editor is right; he's a good editor. That it works better like that. But whoever that was asked that, yes, that makes the third person not be real third person. It's like a third person embedded in a dramatic monologue. I love layers like that. Which is just my Philip K. Dick fanboyness showing because Philip K. Dick is constantly doing those layers inside layers inside layers. And that's my favorite thing to do. I did it with my novel Leadfeather. I've done it with a lot of books, really. That's one of my favorite things to do with extended narrative is to successively pull the carpet out from under the reader in a way that escalates the story's stakes higher.
Jennifer Egan, The Keep. Have you read that one?
I have not. No.
The Keep does this weird sort of Russian doll structure with the story that's really, really cool.
It's a novel?
Yeah, Jennifer Egan. She won the Pulitzer National Book Award, one of those.
I like her novel, not her novel, her story that showed up in the New Yorker, Black Box, which is just like a bunch of little transmissions, almost like tweets from a embedded spy unit in somebody. So she has really neat narrative angles.
I'd like to see that one. I haven't seen that one at all.
As for when to deploy that kind of escalation, that narrative escalation, which is not a dramatic escalation. Dramatic escalation would be like a plot thing, but narrative escalation is you're switching kind of almost genres. It sounds like in the dark, which I haven't seen. I haven't seen Dark. I would look to other texts that do that. And one of them we already talked about, Radio Free Albemuth, Philip K. Dick. But another one of his would be Valis, that does a similar shift. And I would also look at like Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl, because it does a narrative escalation like that too. Maybe the timing is like just a side effect of how long it takes to establish a character whose perception or manner of thinking or of arriving at conclusions we trust. I feel like in The Only Good Indians, that's what I was having to do with Lewis. I was having to burn a lot of pages establishing the mechanisms of his thinking before I let the fantastic stuff start to happen. I don't know if I planned it, but instinctually I knew I have to show the mechanisms of his thought in order to make anything later land. I was working on that old Stephen King thing of make your characters real and then put them in the meat grinder. That's basically what I was doing. But to make Lewis real in the story he's in, where he doesn't trust himself, I have to show his manner of thinking. And I bet I never have really thought about it, but I wouldn't doubt if in that section, The House Ran Red, where we're watching Lewis kind of spiral into whatever he spirals into, that I wonder if it doesn't come about between 40 and 55% in is when things start to cement. They start to, the fantastic gets its toehold or its anchor in the world. And but again, it could just be that that's how long it takes for us to invest in the character and understand how they work. I'm not sure. Because the midpoint is always like the tallest tent pole in your big circus you're throwing or whatever. Like in James Cameron's Avatar, that's when the big tree falls down. There's always something big that happens in the middle like that.
And it came from Del Rio, Stephen. Yeah. You set up the character, right? So before the fantastic comes into play, we already know that Dodd is a smuggler. He's close to his daughter. Every trip is a risk. So you've set up the stakes and showed us this guy who's living a quasi-outlaw life, but he's trying to take care of his daughter. So we're emotionally invested by the time he puts the bunny head on and starts burning out televisions by standing in the same room.
And by that time also, we also understand how mechanically careful he is in the operations he undertakes. He stocks up for this or that, eventuality, and he has certain route he takes to get to his objective, and so once we understand that, then you can put on the bunny head and use that same type of thinking to do his TV burning out and his face melty stuff and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Did anyone catch those titles, which were examples of narrative escalation?
There's Gone Girl, Radio Free Albemuth, and Valis are the three I was talking about.
And Jennifer Egan's The Keep is always the one I point to. If something like Dusk Till Dawn were a novel, how do you think the genre switch could be handled and have the reader believe it?
I think if it were a novel, you would have to start out with a killing of some sort, just such that we're not going to be blindsided by that kind of action when it comes. But it would have to be a mysterious killing. We see somebody stumble out into a parking lot, and then the next morning they're found with their throat gone, and we're like, was that a mountain lion? What was that? But we know that we know the mortal stakes, and then you kind of grind down into the bar, the nightclub, whatever it is, and this is a normal place, this is a normal place, and suddenly it's not a normal place once dark comes. I think that would be a really fun novel to write, or novelization to write anyways. But you're right that there would be a big shift. I would think in that to make the novel work, that shift would have to come right around the break from Act 1 into Act 2 is where I think it would have to come. Maybe that's where it comes in the film too. I don't remember.
Danielle mentioned The Hangman's Daughter. It's not a title I'm familiar with. I'm guessing that's a good example of narrative escalation.
I don't know that either. I don't know Hangman's Daughter.
Christopher's asking, when it comes to the uncanny in mind, do you start with something subtle the character perceives and it grows from there, or do you go big and go further?
I think my method or manner of dealing with the uncanny is the same as my method for rendering monsters, for presenting monsters, which is you show first their claw marks on somebody, then you show their toe around the corner, then you show them you show a form going across a fuzzy security camera or something, and you show them in pieces. That's the way to make a monster real in the reader's head, is show them little bitty suggestive pieces of it, and they'll assemble it into some version of their violent uncle or somebody, which will be worse than any monster you can do, finally. I think that's the way planning the uncanny works best too. If I look over to the right and I see a electrical socket, and for a moment it has 3 slots instead of 2 slots, and when I look back it has 2 again, then that's like seeing the toe of the monster, And then I'm in somewhere else, and I find a light bulb that twists to the left instead of the right. So you build slowly and slowly until you get to a wrong place. It's like baby steps, but if you take the reader along with baby steps, then you can lure them into a big dark space they didn't suspect was around them.
That's that ripple effect you're talking about.
Yeah.
Russell mentions, what about the opposite tactic, dropping the audience directly into a horrific reality, which is the normal routine for the character, and then following their journey outward? Does that resonate with you at all, Stephen?
I love that kind of stuff myself. I kind of prefer it when we don't have to do this meet and greet and long handshake around the room. I like to start with an explosion of blood, explosion of tech, explosion of whatever. It's really kind of like that old tactic you would see in disposable pulp paperbacks where, like, you're reading a Mac Bolan or something, and someone has gone through and taken the most exciting page and put that in front of the title page. Mac Bolan jumps out a window and shoots 14 people and then lands in the ocean and swims away through sharks. And then you're in the story. I dig that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah. We're about wrapped up. Before we go, I'll just mention next month, Vanessa Veselka is going to join us. She won the Penn Bingham Award for her first novel. She's going to join us next month. I think the 10th is the date. Again, Stephen, thank you so much for this has been really solid. I came in thinking, how do we convince readers of something supernatural, unreal? And you glossed right past that. Your concerns were bracketing the supernatural with empathy for the characters and emotionally developed real characters, and then accuracy in terms of the real natural world. And between those two things, once you've established your credibility as a writer, then everything else kind of takes care of itself. Is that a fair summation of your entire body of work?
Probably, yeah, probably.
Is there any one last bit of mic drop wisdom you want to throw down as far as this whole topic goes?
My big advice to everybody is always read outside your genre, because you collect burrs on your pants, and then when you come back to your home fields, those fall off and become seeds and grow into strange, amazing plants in your genre. And I think cross-pollination is what keeps things vital,
Mic drop wisdom with a beautiful metaphor. All right, folks, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you again, Stephen, so much. Everyone else, hope we got to your question. Hope we didn't overlook anybody. Can't thank you all enough, and hopefully we'll see you all next month, all right?
Thank y'all. It was a
Cheers,
blast.
y'all. Over and out.